Here's what no one tells you about manipulation. It works best when you're a good person. When you're empathetic, when you care about being fair, when you give people the benefit of the doubt, those are the exact qualities that make these tactics land. The person doing it doesn't need to be a villain. They just need to know, consciously or not, which buttons to press. And there's a short list. The same patterns, over and over in different relationships, different contexts, different faces. This video names every one of them and shows you exactly how to stop it cold. Manipulation is not a single move. It's not one bad conversation or one moment that finally crosses a line. It's a system. A set of tactics that work quietly, often invisibly, across relationships, across years, inside the most ordinary moments of daily life. What makes them effective isn't force or aggression. It's how well they're hidden. They don't look like control. They look like love, concern, sensitivity, a personality quirk, a difficult week. By the time you begin to recognize the pattern, you've usually already been living inside it for a long time. That's the design. And once you can see it clearly, it starts to fall apart. Gaslighting. Most people have come across the word. Fewer understand what it actually looks like in practice, from the inside while it's happening. Gaslighting is when someone consistently interferes with your sense of reality, not through dramatic accusations, but through quiet, repeated distortion. It doesn't usually announce itself. It arrives gradually, in small moments. You remember a conversation clearly, and they tell you it never happened. You explain how something made you feel, and they tell you you're being too sensitive, too emotional, too reactive. They say it not to engage with you, but to make you question your own version of events. It doesn't look like an argument. Sometimes it's a pause, a patient sigh, a calm and almost gentle correction delivered in a tone that implies you're the one who keeps getting things wrong. It's subtle enough that you don't see it as a tactic. You see it as a recurring pattern of you misremembering, you overreacting, you being difficult. And because it happens one small moment at a time, it never quite trips the alarm. That's what makes gaslighting so damaging over time. It's not one accusation, it's an accumulation. One denial, one reframe, one quiet suggestion that your memory is unreliable. And eventually, you begin to believe it. You stop trusting your instincts. You second-guess what you said. You replay conversations at strange hours looking for where you were unfair, where you exaggerated, where you imagined something that wasn't there. Your own emotional experience starts to feel like evidence against you, and the person doing it never had to raise their voice. It shows up in romantic relationships, family systems, friendships, and workplaces. It can come from a partner, a parent, a close friend, even a manager. Anyone with an investment in being the authority on your experience. And it always follows the same structure. Your version of reality gets quietly replaced with theirs, one small moment at a time, until you've stopped trusting the one person whose perspective actually matters, yours. So how do you deal with it? You start writing things down, not to build a case, but to stay grounded in what actually happened before anyone gets the chance to reframe it. You trust what you felt in the moment. You don't need external validation to believe your own experience. And once you stop offering explanations to someone who has already decided what happened, you stop losing ground. Love bombing. This one doesn't feel like manipulation. Not even close. That's the entire problem. Love bombing is when someone overwhelms you with intensity, attention, and affection. Not as an honest expression of how they feel, but to manufacture a feeling in you that becomes hard to walk away from later. It starts fast. Faster than real connection ever moves. Suddenly, you are the center of someone's entire world. They say you're unlike anyone they've ever known. They talk about the future on the second date. There are constant messages, late-night calls, perfectly aimed compliments, gifts that arrive before you've even had time to miss them. It doesn't feel like getting to know someone. It feels like being chosen before you've even had a chance to choose. And for a while, it's genuinely intoxicating. Because who doesn't want to feel that certain, that seen, that wanted, but that's the mechanism, not the relationship. The intensity isn't about how much they care for you. It's about creating a baseline so elevated, so emotionally charged, that when it disappears, and it always disappears, you feel the absence like something real has been taken. Because that's what comes next. They pull back, they go cold. The messages stop arriving the way they did. The warmth becomes inconsistent, conditional, something you have to earn back. And you, who has been living on that level of feeling, start scrambling to understand what changed. You replay conversations. You adjust yourself. You try to get back to the version of them that made you feel that way, except that version was never the real one. That version was the bait. The withdrawal isn't a coincidence. It's how the dynamic gets set. You chase the feeling, they control the supply. The relationship moves forward on their terms because you're always slightly off balance, always working to recover something that felt that certain. You stop asking for what you need. You start managing their moods instead. The trap closes quietly and without announcement. Love bombing is not only a romantic pattern. It shows up in friendships, in families, in professional environments where someone makes you feel like their most trusted person before you realize how dependent you've become on their approval. The context shifts. The structure is identical. So how do you protect yourself? You slow down. Not because intensity is always a warning sign, but because real connection has a different quality. It builds gradually, earns trust through consistency, and doesn't need to rush because it isn't performing. Watch what someone does over time, not what they say in the first wave of feeling. If someone treats your reasonable pace like rejection, if slowing down gets reframed as you not wanting this badly enough, pay attention to that. It's information. Both gaslighting and love bombing work toward the same end through different doors. One erodes your trust in your own perception. The other builds a dependency that disguises itself as love. Together, they clear the ground for everything that follows. A person who doubts their own reality and craves external certainty is far easier to keep off balance. These are not isolated tactics. They are the foundation. That's not a coincidence. That's the architecture. And recognizing it is where the rest of this begins. Guilt tripping. This one doesn't look like manipulation most of the time. That's exactly why it works. Guilt tripping isn't someone yelling at you or making demands. It's quieter than that. It's a sigh, a pause, a slow, heavy silence that somehow communicates everything. It's the look that says you've let them down without a single word being spoken. Or, if there are words, they come softly, something like, "I just thought after everything I've been through, you'd be there for me." They don't accuse. They don't command. They just make you feel like you failed at something you didn't even know you were being tested on. That's the mechanics of guilt tripping. It isn't about what you actually did. It's about making you feel as though you violated some unspoken agreement, broken some invisible rule, fallen short of a standard that was never clearly set. And even if all you did was say no to something, even if you were simply setting a boundary or prioritizing your own needs, suddenly you feel selfish, ungrateful, cold, like the kind of person who doesn't care about the people they love. What makes it particularly effective is who it targets. Guilt tripping works best on empathetic people, people who are naturally attuned to others' feelings, who take responsibility seriously, who genuinely care about the effect they have on the world. Those qualities aren't weaknesses, but in the hands of someone who knows how to use them, they become leverage. Your care becomes a currency. Your kindness becomes a debt you're always quietly paying down. And the worst part is that you often don't see it happening because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like failing someone you love. It shows up in families, in romantic relationships, in friendships, even in workplaces where someone keeps a quiet ledger of everything they've done for you, and it always moves in the same direction, away from your needs and toward theirs. If I can't make you say yes, I'll make you feel too guilty to say no. That's the logic. And for people who struggle with the idea that disappointing someone might mean they're a bad person, it lands every single time. So how do you deal with it? You pause, You create a small amount of distance between the feeling and your response. You ask yourself one question: did I actually do something wrong, or am I just being made to feel like I did? Real guilt comes from your own values. It arises from the inside when you act in a way that conflicts with who you genuinely are. Manufactured guilt is placed on you from the outside by someone who needs you to feel responsible for their emotional state. You're allowed to tell the difference, and you're allowed to hold your ground even when someone else is disappointed that you did. Triangulation. Triangulation is when someone brings a third person into a conflict instead of coming to you directly. It doesn't feel like a confrontation. It feels like a conversation you weren't part of that somehow became about you. Suddenly, there are reports from the sidelines. Well, everyone thinks you're being unreasonable, or I talked to Sarah and she agrees with me. That's not communication, that's assembly. That's someone quietly building a case while you were under the impression you were just having a disagreement. What triangulation does is shift the terrain. You're no longer in a conversation between two people trying to work something out. You're now up against a position that has already been validated, already been agreed upon, already been decided without your input. Your voice starts to feel smaller simply because there seem to be more of them than there are of you. You start wondering if you're the difficult one, the dramatic one, the one who always sees things wrong. That's not an accident. That's the goal. Triangulation shows up a lot in family systems. A parent who vents about one sibling to another instead of addressing the issue directly, creating alliances that shift and fracture without resolution. It happens in romantic relationships when a partner involves an ex, a mutual friend, or even a therapist as a validator rather than a resource for growth. It happens at work when a colleague builds a narrative around you with management before you've had the chance to speak for yourself. In every version, the result is the same. You're defending yourself against a story you had no part in writing, and it's exhausting. Not because the accusation is necessarily true, but because you're not just dealing with the actual issue anymore. You're now fighting on two fronts: the original disagreement and the invisible audience that's been appointed to weigh in on it. You can't simply address what happened between you. You have to first clear away the opinions of people you've never spoken to, verdicts delivered secondhand, a whole social structure built specifically to make you feel outnumbered before you've said a single word. So how do you deal with it? You pull the triangle apart. You bring it back to two people. You say directly, "If you have a problem with me, I want to hear it from you." Not through someone else. Not filtered through a group opinion, not delivered via a general consensus that I had no part in. You don't owe anyone a defense they can deliver on your behalf, and you don't have to participate in a verdict that was reached before you were even asked. The White Knight. At first, this one looks like the opposite of manipulation. It looks like support, like someone who shows up exactly when you need them, who seems to understand your situation better than anyone, who offers help before you've even had the chance to ask. It feels like relief. And for a moment, it is. But relief has a way of making you stop asking questions. Because underneath the help, there's a pattern that only becomes visible once you start paying attention. The White Knight doesn't just appear when things fall apart. In the most toxic versions of this dynamic, they've been quietly making sure that things fall apart. They stir the situation from the edges, they introduce the doubt, they chip away until the crack appears, and then show up with the solution. That's the White Knight pattern. Not helping because they care about you. Helping because being needed gives them power. And it's convincing because the help is real. At least in the beginning. The comfort arrives, the problem gets solved, and you feel grateful. You feel close. But the support comes with terms you didn't agree to. Terms you might not notice until you start getting stronger and the dynamic shifts. Because here's what happens when you start needing less. When you solve your own problems, set your own boundaries, build your own stability. The White Knight doesn't celebrate that. They pull back. They become distant, even resentful. Some will flip the script entirely. Suddenly you're ungrateful, you've changed, you don't appreciate what they've done. That's the tell. Real support wants you to grow. This version needs you to stay exactly where they found you. So how do you deal with it? You start paying attention to the pattern, not just the gesture. Does this person show up for you? Or do they show up for situations they've quietly helped create? Real support lifts you. It builds toward your independence, not their indispensability. Take the help when it's genuine, but don't trade your footing for it. The silent treatment. Silence isn't always harmful. Sometimes it's necessary. A pause, a breath, a moment to think before speaking. But the silent treatment is different. It's not a pause. It's a punishment. It's what happens when someone uses their absence as a pressure tool, going cold and unreachable not to process something, but to make you feel it. You'll know the difference because of what it does to you. With the silent treatment, you don't feel respected. You feel anxious. You start replaying everything you said, looking for what triggered it. The pressure to reach out, apologize, soften yourself enough to end the silence. That pressure is exactly what the tactic is designed to produce. Because when you're focused entirely on ending the quiet, you stop asking whether you were actually wrong. It shows up in romantic relationships, friendships, even at work. And it always carries the same message. I control when this feels safe. I decide when you get to feel connected. If you push back or hold your ground, the silence gets louder. Longer, harder to sit with, until eventually you bend, not because you were wrong, but because the quiet became unbearable. So how do you deal with it? You name it. You say clearly, I'm open to talking, but I won't be managed with silence. And then you hold that line. You stop chasing the noise. You let the silence be theirs. Communication is only possible between two people who are both willing to show up for it. Breadcrumbing. Breadcrumbing is when someone gives you just enough attention to keep you engaged, but never enough to actually build anything real. They send a message every few days. They react to something you posted. They surface with a compliment out of nowhere. Just enough to remind you they exist. Just enough to keep you wondering. But when it comes to actual plans, actual presence, for actual commitment to anything that requires showing up, it's always vague, always later, always slightly out of reach. It's emotional clickbait. You keep engaging because each small signal feels like it could be the one that leads somewhere. Maybe this time they'll follow through. Maybe they're finally ready, but they're not. They're just dropping another crumb. And the thing about crumbs is that they're designed to look like a trail. They keep you moving forward without ever actually arriving anywhere. Breadcrumbing isn't always malicious. Sometimes it comes from avoidance, from fear, from someone who likes the idea of connection more than the reality of it. But the effect is the same. You're left in a loop of anticipation and quiet letdown, investing energy into something that was never going to become what you needed it to be. So how do you deal with it? You stop reading into the signals and start reading the pattern. Consistency is the only honest signal. If someone's interest shows up in flashes and disappears just as fast, if there's always a reason plans don't materialize, that's the answer. You don't need to decode it. You just need to decide it's not enough. Darvo. This one is disorienting in a specific way. It doesn't just deflect accountability, it inverts it entirely. Darvo stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's what happens when you try to hold someone accountable for something that hurt you, calmly and directly, and instead of engaging, they flip the script. First, they deny it. That never happened. You're exaggerating. Then if you press, they attack. Your tone, your timing. Something unrelated from months ago. And then comes the reversal. They're not the one who caused harm. They are the one being harmed. By your honesty. By the fact that you held them to something. Suddenly you're on the defensive, explaining yourself, wondering if maybe you should have just let it go. That's the sleight of hand. The original issue disappears entirely. In its place is a performance where the person who caused harm gets to play the victim, and you end up apologizing for having a feeling about it. So, how do you deal with it? You don't take the bait. You notice the flip and you return, calmly, simply, to the original point. You say, I hear that you're upset and I'm willing to talk about that separately, but I'm not going to lose track of what I came here to say. Darva works when it creates enough confusion that you forget what you were actually addressing. It loses its power the moment you stay clear. All of these tactics, every one of them, work toward the same thing. They're designed to pull you away from your own center, away from your memory, your instincts, your sense of what actually happened. And the most important thing you can do is learn to recognize them, not so you can catalog every difficult person in your life, but so you can stop handing your clarity over to people who depend on your confusion. You just need to trust yourself enough to notice when something is off. That trust is the start.